When you look closely at the movement of your mind, when you begin to observe how it talks, how it builds images, how it interprets reality, you start to notice something astonishing. Almost everything it says is a story, a fabrication, a projection, a mixture of memory and fear and desire stitched together to give shape to the world it expects, the world it fears, the world it wants. And if you look even closer, you begin to see that 90% of that story is false. Not false in the sense of a deliberate lie. Not false because the mind intends to deceive. But false because the story is never reality. The story is never what is actually happening right now. The story is a translation, a narration, a commentary. And the commentary is not the fact. You may wake up in the morning and before anything has even happened, the mind has already told you, today will be heavy. I'm not ready for this. People don't appreciate me. Something bad might happen. Look at the simplicity of it. Nothing has happened yet. Not a moment has unfolded. But a story has already shaped your reality. And throughout the day, the stories continue, rapid and relentless. A person looks at you strangely. The mind instantly weaves a story. You receive a message that feels unclear. The mind fills in the blanks with its own assumptions. Someone delays their response, and the mind begins constructing narratives of rejection, conflict, or danger. This story-making is automatic. It is ancient. It is mechanical. And yet most of us live inside these stories as if they are truth. We suffer because of them. We react because of them. We fight because of them. But the truth, the simple, direct truth, exists outside the story. Look at your own experience. Think of a moment when you were angry. Not the story of anger, the actual feeling. Before the mind said, he disrespected me. Before it created the picture of being wronged. Before it replayed the insult again and again. The raw sensation of anger. The heat in the chest. The quickening pulse. That was the fact. Everything else was story. Think of a moment when you were afraid. Not the fear of what could happen, but the immediate sensation. The tightening in the stomach, the breath shortening, the senses sharpening. That was the fact. The story about danger, the story about the future, the story about what might collapse. All that was commentary. We rarely meet the fact. We almost always meet the story. But the truth, the reality of this moment, is always what remains after the story dissolves. To see this requires listening. Not listening to the content of thought, but listening to the movement of thought. Listening without interference, without judgment, without wanting to change anything. Listening as you would listen to the wind moving through trees, with openness. When you listen like this, you begin to see that the mind is speaking endlessly. It comments on everything, labels everything, defines everything. It tries to convince you that its commentary is the world. But if you remain alert, if you watch without being pulled into the narrative, something extraordinary happens. The commentary loses its authority. You begin to see the story as a story, and in that seeing, the truth appears. This is where listening, seeing, and doing become one movement. When the story is not pulling you into the past or projecting you into the future, you act from reality. Not from fear, not from memory, not from desire. Imagine you're speaking to someone and they say something sharp. If you listen with the story, you interpret it as an attack. You respond with defense or aggression. But if you listen without the story, without the burden of past hurts or imagined judgments, you simply hear the words as they are. And the truth of the moment reveals the correct response. This direct perception is not personal. It's not emotional. It is clarity. Listening, seeing, and doing, when they are one, create a life without friction. The dissipation of energy happens when we are caught between what is and what the mind imagines. When a problem arises and immediately the mind says, "This shouldn't be happening," energy splits. When a thought appears and you resist it, energy splits. When the past is dragged into the present, energy splits. But when you listen fully, you are simply here. When you see clearly, you are simply here. When you act from awareness, not from story, you are simply here. And in that here-ness, action is whole. Look carefully at this. When you are fully listening, not half listening, not listening through judgment or expectation, the listener disappears. There is only listening. When there is only listening, you are not separate from what is being listened to. You are part of the same movement. When you see clearly, without naming, without comparing, the seer disappears. There is only seeing. And when there is only seeing, you are not separate from what is seen. This is why the observer is the observed. Because separation is created only by the story. When the story drops, the division drops. When the division drops, intelligence flows. When intelligence flows, action is effortless. Consider how much confusion, conflict, and suffering would end instantly if you could meet every moment as it is, not through the filter of story. Imagine how your relationships would transform if you listened without the mind's interpretation. Imagine how your decisions would change if you acted from clarity instead of fear or memory. Look at a simple daily conflict. Perhaps someone raises their voice. Immediately, the mind says, "They don't respect me. They're attacking me. I must defend myself." But if you look closely, none of that is the fact. The fact is, someone raised their voice. Everything else is story. Now, when you stand in the fact and not the story, your response is completely different. You see what is needed, what is appropriate. You are not reacting from hurt or memory. You are responding from clarity. When you understand this deeply, you begin to live without psychological fear. Fear is almost always a story about what might happen. When the story doesn't take root, fear dissolves. Anxiety is almost always a story of imagined futures. When you stay with the fact, anxiety has no soil to grow in. Loneliness is often the story of being unloved or unseen. But the moment you drop the story, you simply feel what is there, and the feeling transforms without effort. Seeing truth is effortless when the story ends, and the story ends when you listen without judgment, see without naming, and act without hesitation. That is one movement, not three. You don't need to fight the story. You don't need to suppress it. Just see it. Just listen to it as you would listen to a child talking in the next room. With care, without involvement, and the story falls silent. Then what remains is reality. And reality is always simple, always direct, always true. You don't have to go anywhere for truth. You don't have to search. You don't have to discipline your mind. You only have to stay with what is left when the story finishes talking. What remains after the story is the truth. And in that truth, life becomes clear.